بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Hello everybody, welcome back to Connections with Sheikh Idris. We're on episode 5 today. I hope you've been enjoying the series thus far. I've been really enjoying getting the feedback, the questions, the comments, all of that's been really beautiful. And I feel like there's something really emerging on the back end of this project of ours. So really appreciate that. Looking forward to sharing more. And today we're on episode 5 and we're talking about mental health, right? And mental, I want to put in parentheses here, mental health not being solely a mental phenomenon. Before we begin here, we're again joined by our dear friend Sheikh Idris. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Idris, welcome. Alhamdulillah, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem. You're welcome.
So, yes, alhamdulillah. So I wanted just to begin because, we've been kind of talking about this, haven't we? The past 3-4 episodes. This won't be kind of a new thing for our viewers that have been following along. We're talking about the holistic, we're talking about the integrative, we're talking about bridging. How can we bridge as Muslims these different ideas of health, of healing, of trauma, of spirituality, of the body, so I can't imagine this will be a new perspective for the viewers that have been following along, but for those people that are just joining in, I want to start with talking about mental health not being a solely mental phenomenon. You'll find that in the history of science and philosophy that this idea of the mental being kind of separate from the body came out of Descartes' work, who's a 18th century thinker, who really split, his ideas are called Cartesian Dualism or the Cartesian bifurcation or something like that, where really he's talking about the splitting of the mind and the body, the soul, spirit, mind, apparatus, and the body. And this really sets up the beginning of objectivity in some way, that there's this type of, noun over there and the noun over here, and these are separate from one another, and how can I begin to take this and use that and modulate this and manage that, and there's a lack of the subjective, there's a lack of the relational that's oftentimes included in that perspective. And so, what happened is obviously as that thinking, that Cartesian thinking came into medicine and into psychology and all of that, we lost the capacity to see the forest for the trees in some way. And as we understand that the body is not a thing, it's more of an event, it's more of a verb than a noun, we can begin to understand that Descartes really had something wrong. He didn't have the whole picture. And actually, he did some damage in him bringing these ideas, though he may have not been an insincere person in trying to understand these things at a more scientific kind of in the zeitgeist of the time, trying to deconstruct things, understand things, and remove them from the magical and the mythical and all of that. But yet he threw the baby out with the bathwater, because what ended up happening is a dissociation of the conscious experience of the human being and the world around them, including their bodies. And so this is something that's really important. One thinker, his name is Guy Claxton, in his book, The Intelligence of the Flesh, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Sidi Idris, he talked about CADS, the complex, adaptive, dynamic system, which is the body, which is the human being, complex, adaptive, dynamic system. And in it, he says that, a system is nothing more than a constellation of processes that make up other systems. It's like the whole-on idea, this idea of wholes, parts of wholes. So these are systems, processes that come together as a constellation and form a greater system. And these are all connected like this. So complex, adaptive, dynamic systems. And that's really what I feel the body is. The body and the mind, if you will, the soul, whatever that consciousness is, it's totally interconnected with this idea that we have this, we're in different worlds. We're kind of this gathering of different worlds within. And that's how we hold the mental, the biological, the relational, social. The psychology now, even the emerging kind of science is talking about the biopsychosocial model. It's not just a psychological model, it's the biopsychosocial. There's a biological somatic, there's not just the semantic verbal, there's also the somatic feeling dimension that's attached to the biology, and then there's the social relational dynamic as well that all informs the health and the well-being of the organism, that can show symptoms in the psychic kind of sphere and the physical sphere and the relational sphere, but it's all connected in this way. And so in some way, this CBT model that we talked about in other episodes, this the talk therapy, just dealing with the mental through at the level of the mental only, ignores so much because we're just at the surface level, and there's so much that's lost in that. And so, I find that to be clinically ineffective and philosophically unsound with our tradition. We don't really understand the mental and all that to be, in the grand scheme of things. So I'm curious, as I kind of open that up here a little bit, what's your conception, Sidi Sheikh Idris, as we talk about the mind, the mental? I know you're also a clinician as well as a scholar. How are you holding these different pieces and making sense of them in your own mind and in your own practice?
Okay, yeah. I mean, what comes up for me from a practice, from more, like a clinical context, is that where we see this showing up, where there's so much focus on I can fix things with my mind. If I just understand things properly, then everything will be okay. I mean, this is probably one of the reasons that brought me into therapy and getting trained up as a counselor and a therapist, was that people were coming with legal questions, and underneath I knew there was something else there that was dormant, that even if I answer this question this person has, it's not going to get to the root of the issue. And that you see that time and time again, that all these things are interconnected, and fundamentally what drives our beliefs are our emotions in so many in so many instances. And to try to address the mental aspect of the belief or the thought, it sometimes creates even greater conflict with the emotional part of us, because we have these different parts of us that we ideally want to be able to create some sort of communication between them. And the modern world is so fixated on I can will myself through. If I just understand things properly, or if I set my mind to something, then I can bring about change. And there's no doubt that that it's true in some context. But if it's not working, we want to be really curious about, that's a very superficial way of addressing something. And sometimes we just, sometimes a superficial approach can work. But if it's not working, then we need to ask something deeper: is what underlies all that, those thoughts you have about that. And often you'll see there's huge avoidance of emotion, and people really neglecting their sense of emotional well-being. And so understanding that all these parts are in play and in communication with one another, or avoiding one another, and when we create some sort of communication between them, and in my clinical practice, it's as I've mentioned in previous session, is this 7 levels of experience, is tapping into those, our sensations, our feelings, our emotions, our behavior, our images that come to us, our thoughts and our beliefs. The moment we start to explore them without trying to solve them, they just sort to start to align with one another, and we start to feel a wholeness. So in the medical model, that's very much influenced by what you've been mentioning, we compartmentalize things. And one of my friends who's a doctor, he said, and even Gabor Mate mentions this in his book, in When the Body Says No, is hardly any clinician that asks the question when someone comes with some ailment, like, what's going on in your life?
Right.
Because fundamentally, all it's not, what this ailment or this symptom, whatever it is, it didn't appear in a vacuum. It's speaking to something far deeper that we need to address. That could be social, like you mentioned. It could be down to family systems, the family system the person's living in. What was it like growing up in your house? Do you feel that you were attuned to? Do you feel people were there for you, or did you feel abandoned? And exploring all these different aspects of ourselves in terms of diet, in terms of emotional well-being, in terms of social, economical factors, and so forth and so forth. We want to get this full picture. And if we just focus on the mental, we're like you mentioned, we're missing the wood through the trees, or is it the other way around? The trees through the wood through the trees. I think that's the one. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Even more than that too. I mean, we're not even here just to bash kind of like the mental health or the psychology, even psychiatry. Using when you say the mind, you also hear this a lot. The mind is the brain, for example,
okay.
and kind of element of that objectification of our experience
Mm,
and that reductionism.
mm,
Uh, Huge, vast horizon of experience, of subtlety, of meaning, of individual kind of relationship with things, with Allah Ta'ala in the world. And now it's just no, your hormones are off. The serotonin and you have your
mm,
transmitters are off, and here's a drug that can help balance them. Even though these pharmaceutical companies, these doctors that push these things have no idea what balanced hormones look like in the first place
mm,
to say, oh, we're to balance the hormones.
okay.
What's the balance moving towards?
Yeah.
Like what is there standard? Is there no idea? We have
Mm,
no idea. Never been established. And it's a great book on that called Lost Connections by Johan Hari. If people are interested kind of in the politics and the and the foul play kind of the pharmaceutical industry in pushing this idea of the mind is the brain, and you have mental symptoms of anxiety, depression, addiction, panic, phobia, whatever, obsessive compulsive types of presentations. These are just chemicals in the brain.
mm,
It's separate from you. It's separate from your life. It's separate from your ACEs. The adverse childhood events, traumas. It's separate from all of that. You just happen to have maybe a genetic or just a weird glitch in your system. Your machine's broken.
mm,
You hack it with this drug.
mm,
And that's kind of like another level to it. It's just like the mental to mental type of clinical approach in psychology. And then you have the machine to machine approach. And both of them are total aberrations
mm,
of what's really appropriate and what we really need for ourselves to heal, to
mm,
feel well and connected and whole and all of that. And so it's so important that we don't follow that line of thinking,
mm,
that the mind is the extent of what mental disease is. There's a whole matrix of interconnected systems that inform our health. You'll never find people that are anxious and depressed that don't have physical symptoms.
mm,
You'll never have it. There's no abstraction of anxiety, but everything else in our life is perfectly fine. And just, oh, how inconvenient.
yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
totally overwrought with depression. It doesn't happen like that. There's so many other things going on.
And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to sit down and we want to say, let's map it all out and see what's in all those different spheres in terms of relationships, in terms of physical health, in terms of relationships, in terms of social, factors. Let's just map it out and be curious, and let's see what's going on. And then we see all the pieces start to link together, and how until you get that epiphany and say, oh, okay, I need to address this in many different areas of my life, and it's not just some chemical imbalance here that's going to, taking a certain drug is going to solve it. We're not completely dismissing the use of pharmaceutical drugs, because they do have their place sometimes,
Yeah,
but they have to be taken within a context, a greater understanding, and fundamentally not becoming dependent on them as well. Um, yeah.
absolutely. So,
Yeah, I mean, Gabor Mate spoke about really interesting what you were saying with earlier. I forgot the author that you mentioned, the first book, but when the body says no, he says psycho, neuro, endocrine, what is it?
Yeah.
Immunology. So we're looking at those four areas, and he highlights in that book, he focuses heavily on the emotional factor because it's so neglected, and that how we react to stress is so important. It's not the stress, it's not the external that has a factor, the external stress, but it's fundamentally how our body reacts to the stress, and how it reacts to the stress is often down to how our bodies developed in the family system. Was there nurturing going on there so that we had some sense of resiliency? If that wasn't there, then we have a compromised system that we're working with that is definitely going to become heavily impacted by external stresses. So we need to work on that part of us of how we do that. And that's relational. That's a relational piece. And so in therapy, we're looking at just starting with the therapist and the client for what it's like to be in relationship to someone where you feel that there's some nourishment going, and you feel there's a space for you to actually grow, rather than fix yourself, because that's part of the problem, the fixing. And I think that's something you want to speak about in one session, is about being solution focused and being what was it? What was it you wanted to do?
Process
Yeah,
oriented.
process oriented, and just being curious and open, because we want to see, fundamentally, we want to see what is going on. What's the behavioral patterns? What's the beliefs? What's showing up? And so we're chunking up to see what on earth's going on, so we can look down on it. If we just become solution focused, we're just like trying to cut the weeds, uh, instead of actually going to the root of the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's part of our system, is it's so solution focused and it's so symptomatically focused, and wants to diagnose things, and wants to just nip it, just solve it on the surface. But these are that we're always going to see there's something deeper down below that we need to explore, and going at it with solution focused is not compassionate.
Mm.
If I just try to solve something, you're not attuning then, are you? It's like if you're with a child and you just want to solve their ADD, their attention deficit disorder, then you're not. It's not going to work because you've got to actually meet the child where it's at. The child won't feel safe enough you know, to feel like it can open up. And once the attunement comes in and you're there for it, half the healing takes place just in that it feels like someone can be there for it and wants to meet its needs. The moment it becomes solution focused, there's the nervous system shuts down because it feels like it's so you just want to, there's no attunement there.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And so again, it's a systems approach. It's the holistic approach that reigns here, and it's looking back and taking cue, I think, from our ancestors. You can find that there was no system before the modern medical technological system that really understood the world the way that we do as moderns now. People had anxiety, depression, go do qigong, and
Mm.
what are you doing? And use herbs and energetic medicine, and maybe go and go for a walk and be in nature. I mean, it was something. There was something natural and wholesome, and systems oriented that helped bring the balance. I think
Yeah, yeah.
it's just really interesting that we've taken so much of our wisdom of the past, and we've relegated it to myth and to you know just romantic notions of history,
Mm.
and clung to what maybe the vanguard in some way of scientific medicine and scientific understanding, but we lose so much in that. And so even going back to our prayer, when and you know better than me here, but a lot of the solutions you find in hadith for like anxiety and depression even are things like spiritual things and things that include the body, like the prayer and I mean, a lot of these things we don't properly honor, as really holistic medicines, like the prayer, for example, and the movements of the prayer, and
Mm.
the pauses in between, and being with other people at the masjid, with other men, and standing side by side, and having even a 5-minute chat after I walk out. Like these institutions were healing, And I mean, even now we're in the midst of COVID now and the lockdowns, and people are just not meeting, and if they're meeting, they're 6 feet apart.
Hmm.
These institutions were healing, and the lack of them ruptures the fabric of society. I mean, we have to do what we have to do, but we also have to know the cost of things,
Yeah.
and that's what really I feel like it's
I,
driving a lot of what I'm sure you're seeing it now, the anxiety and the depression and the addiction
yeah.
that's coming in the COVID time,
Well, I think one major factor is that I often harp on about is that people of the past could take these things for granted. It was, and it was unconscious, a lot of it. So I often make the joke, I may have mentioned it before, is that, people of the past unconsciously ate healthily and they didn't have to spend money on it. People unconsciously worked out because their daily life they had to exert their bodies. That they unconsciously connected, you know, because they had a community around them and they felt unconsciously held, whether they were aware of it or not, they felt held. And today we have to consciously eat well and pay more for it. We have to consciously work out. We have to go to the gym. We have to count our steps. We have to consciously even have a fruitful conversation. I have to pay you whatever your rates are to sit down and have actually a deep, meaningful conversation. Whilst people of the past, they didn't have to do any of this because it was built in their structures of their society and their community. And that's that dislocation point that Gabor Mate speaks about, is that we're living in a time of dislocation where we're ripped of, all of this because we are so focused on productivity. We're so focused on consumerism, and so the human being's sense of being has been ripped from him. Like, it's so funny. As soon as COVID law sort of restrictions lightened here in England, the Prime Minister was saying, "Go out and spend for the country." I mean, as if that is our like what that means to be a human being is to go out and spend, like, just to become a cog in the wheel to serve the economic structure, or like that's our meaning. We're naturally going to, with that sort of mentality, we're naturally as human beings going to feel askew. And with that in context, it's really important to understand that we literally, to have a sense of humanity today, we have to. I believe that is our jihad. That is, like, we have to go back to basics. And me doing what I like, me doing qigong in the park, in the local park here with a group, me going out to Brazilian jiu-jitsu 3 or 4 times a week, me making sure I go out with my mates at least once a month. We meet up and go out. That is a jihad for me, and that is the focus, because it's so hard to cling for many people. We're missing that element of just the connection and the basics. And we need to we're working in a system. Like, one guy gave a crude analogy. He said this system is like a dog and we want it to be a vegan, and it will either die or it will eat us.
Mm.
So we're working against we're working against something that we're never going to have an ideal solution, unless Allah. We don't know what's in store for us, what Allah is in store for us. But in the current climate, we have to work with what we've got, and we've got to be realistic and not jumping to ideals, but really just focusing on what can I do in my capacity here. It's like when the Prophet ﷺ said, usury will be like dust on you, at the end of time. You can't avoid it. So let's work with what, we can't say, well, I'm going to run away from the society and I will avoid it. No, the Prophet ﷺ says you won't be able to avoid it. So what can I do to just keep breathing? And it's finding those little pockets in your life, that don't create more stress, because I made the fundamental mistake a few years back where I focused on diet and exercise to such a degree I stressed myself out, so it actually defeated the purpose. Because the worst thing you can do is stress your system out. All the other stuff is secondary. If you're stressing your system out, it doesn't matter what good you're putting in your body. You will make things worse for yourself. So the first fundamental thing is, how can I learn to gain resilience? How can I gain some sense of, but you're not having to hold the whole thing together yourself. And this sense of wide-eyed, sympathetic, oh my God, what do I need to do? It's just like, let's just get some oxygen in there and some sanity. This is the first step for many of us. And that's a jihad. That is just getting enough oxygen in you,
Mm.
and keeping yourself to some degree stable.
MashaAllah. Yeah, I totally agree. I like the way you said that. The jihad is a struggle for us to be able to actually fight for our basic humanity. And it becomes an imperative because now we talked about the needs that that are dependent on our being well and stable and taking care of others and self and the world around us, and passing this to the next generation of Muslims, inshallah ta'ala, in a better place or in a better standing. We received it in some way. That's an amana on us as I mean, at least in theory.
Yeah, with consciousness. I mean, that's the other piece about the conscious piece is we might not have it right, but we at least be conscious that we don't have it right. And, and we name the elephant in the room. We don't try to pretend things, are not what they seem. And we name that to our children. We name that to the community. We at least be realistic about the circumstances. And that's the first thing is acceptance, of the situation and what we're working with. And we're not being solution, we're just naming things as they are. Yeah, well, what's the solution? How often when I post something, first question, boom, how do I solve it then? I'm just trying to raise some awareness first, and there's no way I can probably put together a few little things you could maybe do in your life on Facebook. I'll type it there on Instagram, but fundamentally it's like, I feel like I'm doing a sales pitch. I'm like, you need to come and let's do some work together then.
Well, that's really, that's the end. And it's a journey.
Yeah.
It has to be individualized. How can I know what's best?
Yeah.
Again, it's part of that objectification.
Yeah. And John Vervaeke called it, I don't know if he named this, but he called it it's I, and then you're an it, basically. Exactly. I objectify you. And that's the society we live in. It's like there's me, my subjective self, but everything else is objectified. So there's no attunement.
There's no attunement. Yeah, it's a patriarchal model in shadow sense. I'm not against patriarchy in the but in the shadow sense, where it's like, again, you have the big boss, like
the authority, the authority.
Yeah. Big boss. It's this command center of the body.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not. It's actually this hub of, as Dan Siegel says, energy and information. And it's like this collaboration of interoceptive processes and emotion, impulses and thoughts. And there's receptors on the skin that get the temperature and pain and vibration and all of that from the outside world and the inside world. And it's streams of different consciousnesses.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah.
And that come into the pool of what you can say is what the brain does, kind of, in some way. It's like this pool, this held kind of different inputs, and then some meaning can emerge from
I mean, that's the word that was going to come for me. Then this emergent property, which we've spoken about before, whilst the solution based is from a sympathetic, I must know what to do, and it's always in a state of panic, and your sense of perception is always limited then. So when we explore, there's an emergence. Yeah.
Exactly. And the point about it being kind of something that you have to do it yourself is so important. That's not something that I can even, maybe we can support it, we can maybe create the conditions where it can arise, but it's your process to ride the wave of, it's like you have to do this. So there's no objectification, it's process oriented, it's holistic. And it's like, as you allow that emerging property of whatever self, whatever conscious, whatever needs to be done, and it's informed by the Constitution, it's informed by, your earth, fire, water, air, informed by your childhood experiences, it's informed by, all these different...
the culture, the society.
Society, your family of origin, stuff that comes down the pipeline for you. There's so much there. There's no way anybody can know. Even siblings have a total different, sometimes, constitution, strategy, from trauma, in the wake of trauma, they have different needs. So there's no way anyone can tell you, you have to take this journey, into the depths of who you are, and in that you find what then comes from that. Naturally, Allah will inspire that. That's the nature of things. MashaAllah. So again, just to kind of recover, because we talked about a lot of different things, and I love that we do that, because these are all principles that we keep returning to.
We're doing a Hakim. I call that a Hakim. Where,
We're his students, aren't we?
yeah.
He says himself, he's like, I'm a poet. It's tough to follow. I take that from him too. If anyone says, "Man, you're all over the place," like it's a transmission. Inshallah. But it's true. It's a great way of teaching, I think.
Yeah.
You keep returning to the principles. You keep returning, and then you bring something else into the mix.
Yeah.
Like the spiral that kind of just expands more and more of. You keep returning to those things.
Yeah.
In different ways.
So I think that's really important that, if things are going on in your life, explore it on all those different levels, the emotional level, the spiritual, like what's showing up spiritually for you, what's showing up emotionally for you, what's showing up physically for you, what's showing up, relationally for you, and just map it out, and then like, can you see correlations? Can you see something? And if you don't, doesn't matter, because you're as you just mull over it, the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind, whatever you want to call it, will work on that. And then you'll start, like just when you're thinking about buying a car, and you're just looking, so you're just seeing what's out there, and then slowly start to things galvanize, don't they, until you start to, and then you start seeing that model of car everywhere. And it's the same thing with this. The more you bring it to mind and you work on it and mull over it without being solution focused, things will start to appear. Like, it's amazing. I'll give you a really simple example. About a week or two ago, I was struggling with some acidity in my stomach, and it was like really annoying me. And I never really had it like that before. And I was thinking, is this an emotional thing? So, I was working with my therapist and sitting and exploring things somatically and so forth. And then I contacted a naturopath and got some advice off them. And I was just getting really frustrated with it, and I was exploring all the different angles. And then I'm driving, and then I fasted, and I try to fast twice a week just to get a sense of, slowing my body down and seeing what's happened now I've fasted. And I was just driving back, and I was just about to break my fast, and I clicked. I said, "It's the kombucha. I'm drinking too much kombucha." Because of the acidity in it. And as soon as I cut that out, it just completely went. So it's like it took me like a week to work with that, until suddenly something it literally just jumped like that. It says, maybe it's the kombucha. And so I contacted my naturopath and said, is this possible? And they said, yeah. And they said, try some fennel with some ginger and some water, drink that, cut out vinegar, cut out kombucha and all these things, and see what happens. And I did that, and it went. So
you treated the root causes as opposed to suppressing with a pharmaceutical agent, like
yeah. I mean, that time I was going with the emotional issues, and sometimes then I was second guessing myself. I was like, is this really? I don't know if this is emotional. I think I was still reading Gabor Mate's book at the time. So it's just about exploring and just and referring to consulting people who are expertise. But at the same time, look, it just jumped out, and that's what I really invite everyone to try when they have an issue, is just take some time with it, slow it down, and explore it in different angles and see what emerges.
Yeah. Even I think I was reading the other day as well. Even the more subtle of emotions, they don't come except with space. Like you have to slow. Like they're slower than the other. Like the fear-based emotions or anger are really quick. Like we get heated so quick. But the compassion, the kindness, the softer type of emotions, love, those a little bit. I mean, they graphed it. I forgot like how much slower it was, but the idea is for the felt sense of safety to land, and then for the heart to open, it takes time. And so the book was talking about these things and how we're always responding in like fast time, and we're not letting things land, and like sleeping over things, and maybe going out for a walk or something, and just digesting it before we act. And so there's something to say about slowing it down, really.
Yeah. And this is the ADD culture we live in, which is the attention deficit. And what Gabor says is like attention deficit disorder becomes because there's no attention to the person, like growing up. like because they had lack of attention, they have lack of attention. And because we live in this culture where it's so hard to give one another attention, like you're saying with the devices, this is what we're dealing with. So we need to slow things down and create space. So that's probably the
Give
message to take from today, I think.
give yourself attention
Yeah.
and open up, and don't miss the woods for the trees.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
Cool. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you very much.
That's a good place to end there, inshallah.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah, I'm happy to.
you. Allah, we'll see you next time.
Inshallah. Look forward to it. Salam.